Well, and just because you hear a little bluegrass, there's still no spitting in the floor. So, look and see if Elsie was here. Oh, man. You know, it's interesting. In fact, hard to believe. It's kind of sad for me to think that summer, I mean, we're in late September now. Summer is over, and we still have some warm days, but once you get into September, pools close, school gets back in, and so that kind of marks the end of summer. We start putting pumpkin spice in everything, right? So even your toothpaste has pumpkin spice in it, and in the stores, I mean, Halloween stuff has been out. Really, I think it goes out with July 4th decorations, so you can buy a pumpkin and some fireworks at the same time. Christmas stuff is already showing up in the stores. You can buy a Christmas tree and a cornucopia, all kinds of stuff. It's just kind of crazy. And, when I think about as the future and what the next few months look like, it won't be long. Halloween will be here, and then there's Thanksgiving, and then there's Christmas and New Year's and all that stuff. One of the things that I appreciate, though, is that for me and from my perspective, Thanksgiving is effectively the perfect holiday. And aside from the fact that it helps us and encourages us to be able to pause and to just reflect on our blessings and to reflect the fact that and honor the fact that God has been good to us, it's kind of the perfect holiday, especially as compared to some of the other things, because for Thanksgiving, you're not having to buy a costume, right? So that's kind of nice. You're not having to buy some gifts. You're just thinking about getting together with family and friends and eating a lot. And when I think about eating a lot with respect to Thanksgiving, one of the things that I get kind of excited about is dressing. Now, I know some of you may not like it. I love dressing. And I realize that stuffing and dressing technically are different things, but for all practical purposes, they're in the same category for me. And even though I love dressing or I love stuffing, I really do. I love those. I look forward to it. I'm excited about it. What is amazing to me is that we came up with that in the first place. I don't know if this has occurred to you, but regularly I will think, what was it like? Somebody was the first to say, stinks, that bread's gone bad. Had that pile of biscuits and cornbread. Nobody ate them, just sitting here. They're hard now. Well, I guess we just have to throw them out. Then somebody says, we got that turkey over there. What if we crammed them in there? Maybe some of that juice will help it out. You think? I'll give it a shot. So we just cram it in the turkey? Yeah, where the guts used to be, just cram it in there. Should we put anything else in it? I mean, put salt and pepper on everything. Yes, so throw some salt and pepper. Should we put any other spices? I don't know. What do we have? We got that big container of sage. What do we use that for anyway? It makes sausage, I think, taste pretty good. I like sausage. Throw some of that in there. Well, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. And so somebody stuffed a bird with old dry bread with some spices and put it in the oven and brought it out. But then once they brought it out, what they hurry up and did was to scoop it out of the bird so that the guest didn't know where it came from. So you put it, so you put it in a bowl, and somebody is tasting that for the first time. So what do you call this? Well, we call it stuffing. The new recipe. And then somebody tries it, and they're like, holy cow, this is good. Now, I know some of you are in states of rebellion and you don't like it, but the rest of us are like me. I love this. And it's crazy that something that seemed to be so bad, old dry bread, it becomes useful. It becomes positive. It's interesting how it is that we can sometimes view something as being so negative, but when pressed, you can start to see some positives that come from it. And that's true not simply with dried bread and whether we make croutons out of them or we make dressing or stuffing out of them. It's also true with a number of other words that we use. In fact, let me give you this word, and it's the word routine. when we hear the word routine, almost all of us, we put that in a category. In fact, we do that with most terms, and so we associate it as either being positive or negative. And I think if pressed, most of us, if we had to pick one category or another, would say routine falls into the negative category. For example, we use this phrase, I'm just kind of stuck in my routine. I mean, you would never say, well, I'm just kind of stuck in happiness. We don't say that. But we say, I'm stuck in my routine, which conveys the idea that routine is negative. But here's the question. Is it possible something that we think or could associate as being negative might actually be beneficial? And not just as a person, but specifically as a follower of Christ, is there benefit that can come from me having regular routine as a part of my walk with Christ? That's the question we want to think about today in a series where it's just going to last 2 weeks. And today we're thinking about the good side. Next week we're going to think about the bad side of routine. And the question is, what is the benefit or what is positive about having a routine in your Christian life? Look with me to the end of your Bibles to Revelation chapter 2. Revelation chapter 2, starting in verse 1, John is told this, "Write to the angel of the church in Ephesus. Thus says the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. I know your works, your labor and your endurance, and that you cannot tolerate evil people. You have tested those who call themselves apostles and are not, and you have found them to be liars. I know that you have persevered and endured hardships for the sake of my name and have not grown weary. But I do have this against you. You have abandoned the love you had at first. Remember then how far you have fallen. Repent and do the works you did at first. Otherwise I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place unless you repent. Yet you do have this. You hate the practices of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate." In this passage, God is speaking and ultimately communicating a message through the Apostle John to a group of believers in the city of Ephesus. And what he says, I believe, deals with the whole idea of routine. And he says, I believe, some positive things about it. And that's, again, what we want to think about. What is positive about you, about me, about us even collectively having regular routine as part of our experience in our life following Christ? Well, based on what we see here, there's a few things I would say. And the first is this. Routine builds legitimate stability. Routine builds legitimate stability. All right, so that you know what's going on. You're aware that the book of Revelation is a book of prophecy, and there's lots of symbolism that's being used. In fact, you see some of it even in this passage talking about the one who holds the 7 stars and walks among the 7 golden lampstands. And what we see at the beginning of this book is that John is receiving this message, this revelation that is coming to him, and he is communicating this message, among other things, to a group of different churches that existed in the first century. And what you see starting in chapter 2, there's 7 different churches that God is sending a message to, that he's saying something to them, that he wants them to understand some things to be true. And the first that he starts with is the city of Ephesus. Now, Ephesus is a city that you're probably, if you're familiar at all with the New Testament, you're aware this is not an insignificant place. In fact, there is a letter specifically written to them by the Apostle Paul. We call it Ephesians. And Ephesus was an important city in the Roman Empire, and it was on a major trade route. It existed in what we would know now as modern Turkey, and it was not just a trade hub, but it was also an important city in terms of culture and was reflective of so much diversity, in particular spiritual diversity, that existed within the Roman Empire at this point. Paul's first encounter occurs with them on his second missionary journey, and he goes with Priscilla and Aquila, and he goes with them to Ephesus on his second missionary journey. Paul doesn't stay with them a ton of time at that point, but he shows up later. On his third missionary journey, Paul spends actually years with them. He spends the better part of 2 years in that city with those believers. In fact, after he leaves Timothy there for another 3 years. So think about this. This is a group of people. This is a church that has had Paul as their pastor and then Timothy. That's pretty remarkable. And so this is a group of people that Paul cared for, certainly a group of people that God cared for, and you still see that this church is in existence, and there's some positive stuff that's going on. And what we have written here in the second chapter of Revelation is about 30 years down the road, about 30 years after Paul has helped establish and plant this church in that city. And as he is writing to them, John here says, is speaking on behalf of the Lord, he says, I know your works, your labor, and your endurance, and that you cannot tolerate evil people. And then he says, you have tested those who call themselves apostles and are not. The word that's used there that is translated as test conveys the idea of effectively performing almost like a trial. It's more than just saying, what do I think about this? But it's critical, meaningful evaluation that occurs. And so he's saying to this group of believers, you are in a bustling big city that has all kinds of influences. And you have individuals that are coming in and they're saying, hey, you should pay attention to me. You should, I've got this new revelation. I have this message well, in fact, this came from God. And so you need to listen to what I say. And you should ignore Paul, you should ignore Timothy, Priscilla and Aquila. But so you need to pay attention to this. And God is saying to them, it is so good that what you have as a fellowship, what you're experiencing as believers is a routine of testing, a routine of evaluating and measuring what is being said, what is being purported against the standard of God's revealed truth. That you're not just saying, oh, well, that's a new idea, or haven't heard that one before, let me sign up for that as well. But you're actively engaging, testing, trying these things and evaluating them against fixed standard, against the truth that God had already revealed through people like Paul and John and Timothy. And because of this, they are not falling to, they are not yielding to, they are not being ensnared and tripped up by false teachers. Put another way, you could say that these are individuals and these are believers who individually and collectively, they're walking with stability. In the midst of a whole lot of secular, pagan influences, in the midst of a lot of individuals coming to them and purporting to have truth from God, they're not being ensnared, they're not falling, they are experiencing real and meaningful stability. And I think that stability was not accidental. It was linked to the fact that this is part of their routine. They had a routine of regularly and consistently, day in and day out, evaluating what they see, what they hear, what they read, all of these things through the lens of what God has communicated. Is that a routine? Yes. Is it a good routine? Absolutely. And in their case, what did it help accomplish? It helped produce legitimate stability. It helped create a firm foundation of truth that could withstand all the influx that they were receiving from both their culture and from those that were trying to come in to the church. You know, back in the early 2000s, there was some alarming numbers that were occurring medically in the United States. And what was going on is that hospitals were experiencing an increasing number of hospital-based infections and surgical procedures that were resulting in death. And so you would think as time is passing that technology is getting better and we're getting better at this. And so fewer people get sick in the hospital, fewer people die in the hospital. Early 2000s, though, that wasn't the case. And you were seeing increasing rates of infection and death through surgical procedures. So in 2008, the World Health Organization instituted what was known simply as the 19-point surgical safety checklist. Well, that doesn't sound very fancy. That's not something that you have to put batteries in or do anything. It was fairly simple. And what it involved was establishing a very basic checklist that during surgical procedures, at various points, simple questions are asked. Who is being operated on? What are we doing? What are we removing? What are we adding? Who is doing what? So the surgeons, the surgical nursing staff, the anesthesiologist, all those that are involved in this, at various points would have to stop and ask very simple questions. You say, I don't know if that's the case. Some of you can attest, you are the grateful beneficiary of this. If you've had, for example, a knee replacement. I've been to the hospital seeing a number of you, you've had knee replacements. They use something that's not very technical at all. It's called a Sharpie. And so if you go in the hospital and have a knee replacement, one of the things that they're going to do before the surgery is they're going to write yes on the leg that they work on and no on the other one. Well, that sounds kind of, I mean, is it? Yeah, but absolutely, that's part of this. And when you say, well, did that have consequence? Absolutely it did. In fact, what it has resulted in, major complications in surgery fell by 36%, and death in surgery has been reduced by 47%. So we've cut death through surgery almost in half because of just stopping and saying, who is this? What are we doing? What are we working on? And that has produced beneficial, life-saving stability in these processes. And they're not affected by and being less affected by all the chaos that could be going on in the operating room, not distracted by the things that could lead them to even operate in the wrong part of the body. That having regular, simple, basic routine can produce meaningful, legitimate stability so that falls, so that accidents, so that stumbling does not happen. In my life as a follower of Christ, in yours, and in the Ephesian believers, was it beneficial for them to have routine? Yeah, it was really beneficial. And because it was part of their routine, I'm going to measure what I see against what God has said. I'm going to measure and test what I have heard. If it's in the classroom, if it's in the break room, if it's in the workroom, wherever it is, I'm going to evaluate that against what God has said, evaluate it and test it so that my walk is not subject to stumbling and falling. But there's another benefit we see in this passage, and that's this. Routine promotes personal responsibility. Routine promotes personal responsibility. Jesus is praising this group of believers. This is effectively a commendation for them, and he says this. He says, I know your works. And when he says, I know, that conveys the idea of intimate, real knowledge. Not like, oh, I've heard or I have an awareness, but I know in and out the details, he says, of your work. And he says that I know your actions and deeds, but then he uses the term that's translated as labor. That means to work to the point of exhaustion. So it doesn't mean that you just do a little something, but that you're working tirelessly and you keep going. And this that they were doing, living as followers of Jesus in a culture that was pushing in the opposite direction, was tiresome. And it was requiring consistent day in and day out working against the tide. In fact, in the book of Acts, you see some of the pushback that the silversmiths gave when they were preaching against idol worship, and the silversmiths effectively riot because it's hurting their business. As these Ephesian believers are living out their commitment to Christ, they are getting real pushback. Needs are continuing to increase, and Jesus is saying to them, listen guys, I know what you're doing. I see what you're doing. You are not just doing something, but you are working, and you're working hard consistently. One of the benefits of working hard and working consistently is that it produces a sense of personal responsibility, so that as you are serving, as you are doing whatever it is that you're doing in Christ's name, you are doing so because there is this sense in which something is depending on me. Something is relying on me. The nature of their work was such, the nature of their service was such, that they weren't getting to the point where like, I just don't feel like doing this today. No, but they had this regular routine, but they're like, this is what I am called to do. There is this sense of personal compunction. There is this sense of personal responsibility. This is dependent on me to engage this person. This is dependent on me to minister to this person. It's dependent on me to teach this person. It's dependent on me to invest in this person. This is part of my personal responsibility. And is that a good thing? Absolutely, it's a good thing. Let me illustrate it this way. This past week, I saw a video of this lady that was talking, and I guess she lives in Charlotte, and she was mentioning and talking about a particular church in Charlotte, large church. And one of the things that she said in this video is that she'd been a member there. She said, these are her words, she'd been a member there for 10 years. And she was putting this video online, and she said that, and it seems that it was part of her normal routine that she watched the service online. Though she was a member, that's how she was kind of connected to the church, that she watched online. And she said that she watched that last Sunday in particular, hoping, among other things, that her pastor would mention the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And in that service, nothing was said at all about him as part of the message, nothing part of the service, nothing before, nothing afterwards. And so she posts this video, and her question is this: I think that I should probably change churches because my pastor didn't say something about this. And when I saw that, my first reaction had nothing at all to do with Charlie Kirk and the tragic loss of his life. But it had everything to do with that woman's commentary. And I thought this: you can so easily walk away from a fellowship. Really, that's all it takes? That you were hoping that a topic would be mentioned, that a person, although tragic, the loss, that you were hoping that would be mentioned, and it wasn't. And so because of that, you'll just say, bye? And I thought, what might make it possible for that to happen? I believe, and I don't know anything about this woman personally, but I'm willing to bet, and by her own testimony, she's connected online. Service? Would she dare serve God by assisting families and loving on children in a nursery? Not a chance. She's not even found on campus. Is this somebody that might engage in personal discipleship and meet during the week with somebody to help stimulate them in their faith? Doubtful. Is this someone that would say, you know what, I'd be willing to teach a small group, a Sunday school class? Is this somebody that would say, you know, I'd be willing to be part of an ensemble group here at the church or as part of the choir? Doubtful. Doubtful. In fact, I really believe that this woman could almost certainly leave that church, and the impact of her absence is this: 0. Why? Because she's responsible for nothing. Nothing depends on her. And I think candidly, we have an epidemic of this posture in the American church today, where we have created these shows and these sights and wonders for people to go and be entertained, for people to go and watch, and then just walk away. And as part of their routine is their service, is their labor, is their tireless labor? Absolutely not. And so it makes it so easy to say, bye. Why? Because you're responsible for nothing. Nothing. Nothing depends on you. No one depends on you, because you've demonstrated candidly you're not responsible. So is routine a bad thing? I don't think routine's a bad thing, because it, day in and day out, serving, doing so even when it's not easy, doing so even when you don't feel like it, doing so even when your emotions are headed in the opposite direction, but you keep on because you realize that there are people and there is ministry, there is kingdom advancement that you've gotten not just aligned with, but is in some ways dependent on you. You keep going. You keep serving because you are personally invested and you are personally responsible. Is that a good thing? You bet it is. There's another benefit that we see in this passage, a final one, and that's this. Routine fosters meaningful endurance. Routine fosters meaningful endurance. Jesus saw, I believe, real spiritual discipline and practice within the church. And he says this to them. He says that you have tested, and in verse 3 he says, I know you have persevered and you have endured hardships for the sake of my name. So he says, I know that you have persevered. That's another word for enduring. And he says, but you persevered and endured, he says, hardships for the sake of my name. So what they have done is that they have been living as followers of Jesus, and it's not easy. There is pushback. And in the first century in Ephesus, there was going to be a lot of pushback. This is a place where emperor worship was rampant. This is a city that had a temple to the Greek goddess Artemis. This is a place where occultic temple prostitution was rampant. This was very much a pagan, very pagan city. And to live as a follower of Jesus was going to demonstrate your commitment to Jesus that is at odds with the torrent of culture. And it was going to bring some enemy fire. Jesus says to them, hey guys, you have been doing this. You've been living out this whole following me, and you've been drawing some fire, but you keep going. You've been getting pushback and you've been getting criticism. Some of them were almost certainly experiencing not just verbal abuse, but physical abuse. Suffering and experiencing financial consequences. People wouldn't do business because of this. People wouldn't buy their products. People wouldn't trade with them. It was going to continue to increase so that you're going to see flagrant physical persecution so that people would lose their freedom, that believers would even lose their lives. And Jesus is praising them, and he says that you guys, I am so pleased by what you're doing. You have endured these hardships, and not simply that you've been through difficult stuff, but the cause for this. You've done this for my sake. That you've been through this, and you've been bearing these burdens that are not because of your last name. It's not because of where you're from, not because of your language, but you've been enduring this because of your commitment to me. And he says, you keep going. You have not grown weary. So it's tough, really hard. You're getting real and pronounced pushback, and you keep going. Even when you're tired, you keep going. And what's his word for that? He says it's endurance. How did that happen? Because this is part of their regular routine. Now, Jamie mentioned earlier about how he had done a run yesterday. We had gotten the group from Gate City arrived at the children's home yesterday around 8:30, and we get these assignments and we go do our various things. And Jamie's doing some stuff. Then he comes around, he's seeing people, and I was talking to him at one point, and he said something about how he had run 12 miles yesterday before coming to this. And what he's doing, he's training for a half marathon that he's going to be doing with Micah next month. And so yesterday, I don't know when that started. For me, it would need to start like on April. But before arriving, he had run 12 miles. And I thought about that repeatedly afterwards. I thought, holy cow, 12 miles. Why would you do that? But as I'm thinking about that, I'm also thinking about this fact. There's not a chance on the face of God's green earth I could do that. I could not. Maybe, I don't even know if you could drag me 12 miles. 12 miles running and then going to do something. And I just know there's no way that I could do that. Do you know why? Because I can't run a half mile. Like when I think about running, I think about like I ran some errands. There are times where I have run to the bathroom. That's about the extent of the running. But I'm not running 12 miles because I haven't run, and I would probably get winded running. I might be able to run a half mile. But by the time I get to that mile, I'm needing an oxygen tank. Certainly not running 2 miles, 4 miles, 8 miles, 10 miles, 12 miles. There's no way I could do that. Do you know why? Because I'm not regularly running a mile. I'm not regularly running a half mile. You know this. You understand this. That as you continue to press, physically what happens? That's how your endurance is built. Jamie didn't start running 12 miles. He started running a mile, 2 miles. And as you continue to do that, what happens? It builds endurance. They were getting pushback, and they kept enduring. Why? Because it was part of their routine, their regular, consistent routine. Even in the face of a hostile culture, we're going to keep pressing on. Even in the face of people saying, you're not smart, and I can't believe that you're such a mental Neanderthal that you would accept that. Even in the face of all of that, in the face of argumentative pushback, physical, relational ostracization, and economic adversity, they were still continuing to go. Why? Because it was part of their routine. And what does Jesus do? He praises them. Listen, routine often gets a bad rap. We say things like, I am stuck in my routine. But there are some real positives, that come from it. And Jesus is praising the routine of these Ephesian believers. Let me ask you this. If Jesus were to evaluate your walk with him, would he praise your routine? Because truth be told, you've got one. It might be lax, it might be effectively absent, but you've got one. Would the routine that you have in serving Christ, in following him, in living as one of his followers, would he praise it? Would he speak of the ways that as a regular student of his word, you exercise discernment in the things that you hear, that you watch, that you are told? Would he praise the service that you offer? Would he say, I know of your labor. I know that for the kingdom's sake, for my sake, you are working and serving and investing tirelessly? Or would he look at you and it would be crickets? When he starts to talk about your service, what would he say? Would he praise the service that you offer, not that you're not fickle and operating as though, well, I'll serve if I feel like it? Or will he praise the fact that week in and week out, you're in the trenches, seizing opportunities, meeting needs, because that's what God has called us to, and that's part of your routine? When following him is not the easy thing, when there's pushback, when there's a whole lot more condemnation than commendation, do you keep going? Or is it that if he were to speak of your routine, he would say, well, you say the blessing, you go to church sometimes, you sit in a worship service, you have a routine. You do. And there are real and meaningful positives in having one as a follower of Jesus. The question you've got to answer today is this: is your routine one he would praise? Will you bow your heads with me?